Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. According to Testosterone Nation, creatine is no longer just a bodybuilding supplement. More scientists now believe it's actually a conditionally essential nutrient. In this episode, we will be discussing the benefits of creatine deficiency, who should take creatine, and how much and what type of creatine one should take to age well.
Hey, so we've mentioned in the past on a few of our other podcasts some supplements that are out there. What is your recommendation for the best supplements as far as weight training or performance overall goes?
Personally, I kind of follow a list that I got from Mike Israetel and people at Renaissance Periodization and some of their writings. I wholeheartedly kind of agree with the list. And so it's what I kind of stick with, because this is the list that is the types of supplements that are most well supported in the literature, meaning that there's not this equivocal, depending on the nature of the study, depending on who did the study and who sponsored it, that the results are going to be skewed in one way or versus the other, because I do have a lot of skepticism about a lot of the supplements that are being promoted out there. But my list of 5 would be whey protein, casein protein. Now, those are 2 different protein supplements that are both based on dairy. Whey is a little bit more digestible, absorbable, so it absorbs much faster, so it's much better for protein supplementation around your workout. Whereas casein protein, for somebody who is trying to increase muscle hypertrophy, is a good protein supplement to drink or consume prior to sleep. And so it absorbs a bit more slowly, and those amino acids are getting out into the system to kind of facilitate protein synthesis in the muscle a bit more effectively. So those 2, I think, are very important. Creatine is probably one of the most well-studied, well-supported supplements that's out there, and I think it is something that all athletes should be taking. Glucose, which we tend to not think of sugar as being a supplement, but for performance and so around the workout itself, a glucose supplementation may be supported in order to keep the muscle fueled. And then finally, caffeine. Caffeine is a bit more of a stimulant. It is going to help you kind of be more alert, be more productive in your workouts. So those who would prefer to take a pre-workout drink, which I am not at all a fan of pre-workouts unless you're maybe a high-performing power lifter that really needs to just get that edge to get that extra weight up. Caffeine is cheap and it's easy to consume, and it doesn't carry all the other crap that comes with some of those pre-workout supplements. So that's kind of my list. What are your thoughts?
No, I couldn't agree more. And I would also really agree with you that creatine is easily the number one most studied thing that there is out there. And at one point in time, creatine did get a really bad rep, and people were saying, oh, it's dangerous for you. But the literature that's out there, that's not the case.
Yeah, there is. I haven't found any literature other than if you have a kidney condition.
Right.
So if you do have a kidney condition, then you certainly want to, I would say, approach creatine with more caution. Talk to your physician about it, because as we're going to talk about here, I think creatine is a crucial supplement for us for many different aspects of performance. It is safe. At one point, I used to teach a little bit of caution with wrestlers to take it, because the idea was that it was trapping fluid inside the cell, and there's a possibility to actually become dehydrated if you're not getting enough fluid, because you can't get that fluid out of the cell. And there were a few deaths a number of years ago, this is probably almost 20 years ago, of wrestlers who The only commonality was that they were taking creatine. And I think that has been very well dismissed over the years in studying in the literature. And so it is a very safe supplement for people to take. And in reality, if we are consuming meat, we are consuming creatine on a daily basis.
Yeah, so I think that's what we're going to dive into today and ask our listeners, are you getting enough creatine to age well? According to Testosterone Nation, creatine is no longer just a bodybuilding supplement. More scientists now believe it's actually a conditionally essential nutrient.
Yes. And what they find is that, and this also comes from the T Nation article, which again, we'll link a number of different articles that we're going to talk about. We'll have a pretty long source list at the end of today's podcast. So we're not going to probably reference everything specifically as we go here, because then we start to sound like a research article and we'll put everybody to sleep faster than we probably normally do. But according to the article, they say that when children don't get enough, it jeopardizes their mental and physical development. When adults don't get enough, they run the risk of not maintaining normal energy flow and being more susceptible of neurometabolic diseases. And so the general recommendation coming from much of the science is that we get about 1 gram of creatine per day. And generally that should be enough to, if we are omnivores, we're eating meat, we generally will get enough of that to support the daily turnover that we see with creatine. So approximately 1 gram per day. Now that's, I think a 70 kilogram individual. So if you're a much larger individual, you may need a little bit more creatine, but more than likely, if you are eating meat, you're getting a little bit more of that in your diet.
Yeah, actually, a group of Russian researchers assessed dietary creatine intake for the National Health and the Nutrition Examination Survey in 1999 through 2019. They found that 68.6% of adults consume less than 1 gram of creatine daily, indicating a relatively high proportion of inadequate dietary creatine intake in this age group.
Yeah, so really across the board, we're seeing people are not probably getting enough creatine. And if you're a vegetarian, it's going to be even worse because you're not consuming meat products. And so really, what are those implications for having a creatine deficiency? 69% of the population isn't getting enough. It's going to create some issues. So according to that Russian research group, they suggest that the daily intake of creatine can affect growth in children ages 2 to 19 years. They observed that the height of children deficient in creatine was lower than in their taller peers. They suggested that an additional, and this is very interesting, an additional 0.1 grams of creatine ingested per day equated to an additional 0.60 centimeters of height.
Wow.
So about 0.5 centimeter. That's not a lot, but 0.1 creatine isn't a lot either.
Well, it kind of goes the opposite direction of if you want to grow big, eat your vegetables, right? In this particular scenario, it's kind of like if you want to grow, make sure you're eating your meat, get that creatine in. So that's interesting.
Yeah, how can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat?
How can you have any pudding?
Yeah, I mean, that whole thing that, our parents used to feed us about, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're not going to grow and stuff like that. I mean, there's obviously some truth to that. There's nutrients in there, but those vegetables and meats should complement one another in terms of us getting a balanced diet that is going to allow for the greatest amount of health.
Diving back into that T Nation article, the article suggests that when kids who have some sort of traumatic brain injury are given creatine, they show improvement in a variety of parameters, including communication, locomotion, and cognitive function in general.
Yeah, so it makes you kind of wonder, too, we hear so much about kids having ADHD. How much of that maybe is associated with more of a creatine deficiency?
Ooh, that's a good.
I mean, I don't have anything to support that, but certainly it warrants a little bit of investigation. And it does seem that creatine benefits in normal brain development and function. And so it should be something we should be considering for children. And remember, when we talk about aging well, we start aging well when we are first conceived.
Mm-hmm.
And so for proper brain development, and perhaps even maybe there's even some issues in terms of limiting the risks of dementia and other things as we get older, if we have adequate creatine in our diet early on in life.
I would say not even just dementia, but Parkinson's and any
anything that's affecting the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Looking at a few different sources, we tend to think of creatine as a muscle supplement. That it gets into the muscle, it helps to support the function of adenosine triphosphate in fueling muscle contraction. But I think it's like 16% of the creatine we ingest actually goes to the brain and fuels the brain. And the brain is very dependent upon creatine for adequate function.
Yeah, so it seems that creatine's benefits the brain development and function. Creatine deficiency is also linked to depression. There was a study that found that depression was 42% more prevalent in the lowest quartile of creatine consumption, 0 to 0.26 grams a day.
Yeah, so that's people that are really well below that normal adequate creatine intake, of 1 gram. So, about a quarter gram is not a lot. So obviously that is individuals that are consuming almost no meat per day. But it also has a role in protecting the heart and the liver as well. Apparently, about 65% of adults who consume less than a gram a day have about a 2.62 times higher risk of angina pectoris and a 2.59 times higher risk of liver disease.
That is just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So, we're talking brain condition, we're talking heart condition, liver conditions.
Talking emotional health as far as lowering depression.
So, of the supplements we talk about when aging well, what seems to be most important to aging well? It's starting to look like creatine may be a very important supplement.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Diving back into the heart, creatine reduces plasma cholesterol and homocysteine, both well-known risk factors for heart disease.
Yeah, so the effects on homocysteine are also what may reduce some of that risk of liver disease because it has an effect of reducing the chemical that leads to kind of some of that diminished fat accumulation in that organ. And so fat in the liver can damage it and lead to impaired function.
Maybe that's what was going on with my liver issues, that they could never figure out what was going on. I just kind of stopped taking. I was taking creatine every single day, and then I just kind of stopped during the pandemic.
Were you consuming meat?
Well, yeah, but not as much as I wanted to. It was just here and there.
It could be. I mean, as I said, it's conditionally essential, and for some people, it is going to be more important than for other people. And so it kind of warrants examining our creatine levels for our health. And so should we be taking creatine to age well?
Yes, absolutely.
I would agree. I think if you're going to take a supplement, I would, creatine would be my first choice. And you said you stopped taking creatine. Are you no longer taking it?
No, I'm actually starting to retake it again. Which is fascinating because prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was incredibly cheap and readily accessible at any supplement store. I think for $11 or $13, you could get a kilo of it. And for that same kilo nowadays is $49. It's crazy how much creatine has gone up.
But it does. I mean, you compare that to whey protein. A kilo of whey protein is going to be a bit less than that, but you consume much more volume of that at a time.
Correct.
And so, if you kind of factor in the daily cost of that creatine, it's really not that expensive. And, the best thing is we'll talk about is to really shop around. We'll talk about some of what are the best types of creatine and so on. But before we get into that, how should we supplement creatine?
Well, the traditional approach has been to load creatine. This involves a protocol of taking between 20 and 25 grams a day and then divided those doses out throughout the week, followed by a maintenance dose of 5 to 7 grams a day.
Yeah, that's kind of what was in the instruction when creatine really kind of came to the forefront. And I'm trying to remember how long ago it really was that I really started kind of looking at creatine. But when I first took creatine, it was like kind of do a loading phase, and then you back off, and then you maintain for a while, and then you go through a period of time where you actually don't take creatine so you can kind of deplete the muscle, which now in hindsight, knowing these things about how it affects brain and cardiovascular health and everything else may not have been the best approach, but you kind of let it deplete again and then you load again. And so you go through these cycles, which was pretty complicated. And as the research went on, it was later discovered more that 5 grams per day taken for 30 days, and then you could actually reduce that to about 3 grams per day, actually worked just as well. You have a little bit longer period of time to full saturation of the muscle, but it was a little less burdensome on the stomach. There was less likelihood of gastrointestinal upset and some of those types of things. It's a little bit easier to just kind of get in the habit of taking so many grams per day. How do you currently take it?
I just take about the 5 to 7 grams, just that little scooper, and I just put it in, and then I just either add it to water real quick and I slam it, or I just meat, really. Try and get red meat in, some steak and chicken.
Yeah. I mean, I don't eat quite as much red meat anymore as I used to, primarily just for the added calories that go with it to try and stay a little bit leaner as I attempt to age well. But I do take creatine every day, and I take it a bit more in conjunction with my workout. And so I'll usually put in, I think it's like a 1/8 of a tablespoon measuring spoon actually in the container. So I just take 2 scoops of that, and it amounts to, the 2 scoops, I believe, is about 5 grams. So roughly about 5 grams every day. I don't worry about precision with the measurement. If I'm a little less, a little bit more, it's not going to be hugely detrimental. So I just do the 2 scoops. And then I'll usually mix that in with, water with, some of those little squirts, the flavored stuff. I think it's Mayo, or I think it's the brand that we tend to use. It just gives it a little bit of flavor, and it makes it a little bit easier to consume. And I just kind of drink that through the workout and sometimes through the whole day. I don't worry about downing the whole thing. I let it just kind of, I'm consuming it through the day. I think in the past we used to think that you had to take that 5 grams at once, and swallow it. But now the research seems to indicate that it's really just the overall daily consumption of creatine that's most important. And so it may actually be even more beneficial to kind of nurse that creatine into your system throughout the day. Now, my son, he takes creatine as well. He's getting a little bit better at being regular with it. There was a period of time where, I forgot to take it. But for recovery with sports and everything, because his wrestling practices have been so grueling and he's really trying to keep weight on rather than lose it as a big guy, he started taking a branched chain amino acid, which again is another supplement. It's not on that 5 list because I don't think it is a critical supplement. The benefits are probably not as broad and absolute as creatine, but in his case, I think getting those extra amino acids into the system help kind of maintain muscle mass was going to be important. So he calls it his crimson elixir because it's like a fruit flavor, and it comes out kind of this reddish color. But he'll put his creatine in that, puts a scoop of the branched chain amino acids into like a 2-liter bottle and just drinks that throughout the day. And he'll generally drink like 2 bottles of that. And I don't know if he does creatine in both bottles, but he's getting at least 5 grams a day, just by nursing that throughout the day. So I think that's an easy way to get it in, is just mix it into a drink that you like and are going to drink regularly.
Doesn't some of the research say that, that's the reason why I slam it, is because I thought with creatine, once you put it in water, it'll completely dissolve and almost kind of disappear. Like it just, isn't it? No?
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
I don't think chemistry works that way.
No, I thought it was.
I think that was something that was believed for a while, but the literature, more current literature, seems to indicate that was not really the case. That it doesn't break down the way we used to think, and so yeah, it might be better to consume that serving in a shorter period of time. But I don't think there's any harm really in consuming it over the course of several hours if you need to.
Gotcha.
I might be wrong in that, but again, we need to be getting at least that 1 gram. And so if the first sips of that contains, we drink half of a serving, we're getting 2.5 grams. And if that begins to diminish over time and we have 5 grams in her, maybe we only get 4 grams over the course of that. But, what's the worst that happens? You've wasted that little bit of money on that 1 gram of creatine.
At that point, just dry scoop the creatine and just.
Yeah, I've seen guys do that, and it's like, why would you do that? I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense to dry scoop it and follow it with water. Why don't you just drop it in the water you're about to drink, stir it up, and down it?
But then the residue gets on the side of the shaker. And then, that's just even less creatine that you're consuming.
I don't know. But, how about the powder that goes into the air as you are dumping that into your mouth as well? So what about the average person who's just looking to age well?
Well, for general health purposes, taking 1 gram of supplement creatine a day would probably easily fulfill most people's requirements for creatine, even if they're vegetarian.
So, yeah, I think if you are vegetarian, you really seriously need to consider taking some creatine.
Mm-hmm.
And there are concerns that because creatine is in meat, that it's from meat sources. Actually, I believe most creatine isn't even from meat sources, actually comes from plant sources. And I don't understand the whole chemistry behind how they're getting it from the plants into the supplement container. But if you're a vegetarian, you're going to want to consider taking it because you're not getting it from the majority of the vegetables that you're eating. You're not getting sufficient, and you are more likely to be one of those people who are depleted of your creatine. So 1 gram per day, I would go the 5 grams so that you're really making sure that you are topping off the muscles and the brain. And I'm not sure, I'd have to go back into that literature a little bit more closely and look at, when they say the 1 gram recommendation, is that more specifically for kind of the total body creatine, getting enough into the brain just for baseline function? Or, if you are somebody who is much more physically active, do you have much greater demands for creatine? I would suspect that if you are active, particularly if you are lifting weights, you have a much greater demand for creatine, and that 1 gram may not be enough. It's kind of similar to our recommendations for protein. 0.6 to 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is enough to maintain and even build a little bit of muscle mass. But the more active you are, the more you're going to need. And the more strenuous your activity, the more you're using that for energy production within the muscle. So it's not even going into building the muscle. And so I would have suspected it's the same thing with creatine. The more intensely active you are, the more demand you're going to have for creatine, because that creatine is getting kind of used up in the process of utilizing ATP within the muscle. And so if you're contracting the muscle a lot, you're going to need a little bit more creatine. So I would recommend going to about 5 grams per day, 3 to 5 grams, and you're going to be covering yourself more than adequately for your health and for aging well.
Yeah. Well, there's several types of creatine out there, which we kind of discussed before recording this. What would be the best type of creatine for someone?
Well, first, let's talk about what are the types of creatine. And there are essentially, I believe it's 5 or 6 different types of creatine. When it comes down to it, really, there's 2 types. But creatine monohydrate is probably the most widely researched and used type of creatine. Most people, if you ask them if they take creatine, that's what they're taking. They probably don't even realize that they're taking creatine monohydrate. They go, I just take creatine. And that's the most readily available, often the cheapest. And most of the research has been done on that, partly because it's so cheap. The second type is creatine ethyl ester. Sounds like your 2 aunts, Aunt Ethel and Aunt Esther. But it is believed to have a better absorption than monohydrate, but it doesn't appear to be quite as effective. And so it's generally not recommended. And I don't know if I've ever even seen that supplement available for purchase. So, and then creatine hydrochloride is gaining a lot more reputation and is becoming increasingly more studied, although it's less well studied than monohydrate. It appears to be a bit more soluble, and from my own experience, it is much more soluble than monohydrate. So you don't get that grittiness to the mixture when you drink it. It dissolves very quickly. So you don't get the grittiness of the monohydrate, but it can be a little bit more bitter. And so I don't think I could drink creatine hydrochloride in just plain water. I need my little squirt in there or mix it with something with some flavor to it. Whereas monohydrate, you could probably get by if you can deal with the grittiness, drinking it just in water. There are some limited studies on buffered creatine, but those studies are limited. It may be as effective as creatine monohydrate, but it's really hard to tell. Liquid creatine appears to break down and become ineffective. And that might be, I think, a little bit more where you mix it in, that you got to down it pretty quickly. And maybe I need to look into that a little bit more. But when you buy it in a liquidized form, it's generally not going to have quite the same performance benefits and other health benefits that monohydrate's going to have. And then finally, we have creatine magnesium chelate, which it's basically just creatine chelated with magnesium. And more simply, that's just magnesium is attached to the creatine molecule. It may be effective, but it's really not any more effective than creatine monohydrate. So in general, I would say that creatine monohydrate or creatine hydrochloride are the most preferred. And in either case, you want to look for one that is micronized so that the granules are much smaller. They're going to dissolve much more readily, and it's going to absorb a little bit more effectively.
Which is funny because that price increase that I mentioned earlier, the price increase for creatine monohydrate has gone up significantly, but micronized creatine is way cheaper than it was ever before. I think it's really interesting how that kind of has switched up.
I think that's all the kind of product availability, the shipping, and all the staffing issues and all the other stuff that has kind of come from COVID-19. And hopefully those prices normalize a little bit more. So with that kind of recommendations, I would first off say, look at price. We've talked about which ones are most effective. And if you're looking at creatine monohydrate and creatine hydrochloride, then you want to look at which one is really going to be most affordable for you and most accessible. I've had trouble getting creatine hydrochloride lately. Again, same thing, availability issues. And so if I can't get it, I'm going to go ahead and get creatine monohydrate. That's what I'm taking right now. Buy it from the most affordable source and a reputable source too. You don't want something that they tell you it's creatine monohydrate, but it's something that's really, kind kind of cut with just some other powderish form or something like that. I like Bulk Supplements is a pretty good company. There's nothing fancy about their packaging. They're pretty cheap, and you can get it on Amazon or you can get it directly from their website. They have both creatine hydrochloride and monohydrate. Again, I just buy based on price. I think in both cases it is micronized. So look for micronization if you can. What about you? What's your thoughts?
I would recommend, it's really, I really trust, it's either Super Supplements or Vitamin Shop. They're part of the same family, and their in-house name brand is actually Body Tech. And I think as far as bang for your buck, I think that Body Tech is a really, really well-known, reliable company. I think them being associated with Super Supplements and Vitamin Shop, like they take pride in making sure that they're given the best that they can out there. And also, like I said, it's cheaper compared to some of their competitors that they sell, like oh my gosh, Gold Standards. Wow, I'm completely drawing a blank right now.
Yeah, I don't think it matters.
I think,
really, I mean, nobody's supporting us financially by promoting their products, so I don't feel a huge need to say, "Hey, we're going to support this particular creatine brand." And I wouldn't not necessarily ever do that, because as long as it's a decent product, look at the price and consider the taste. Do you prefer monohydrate versus hydrochloride? So maybe you start off with a smaller, you don't buy a kilogram of it, you buy, a smaller container of it, try it out, see how it works for you, how you like it. If you don't like, say, monohydrate, try hydrochloride. And if you like that better, stick with that. If there's no real difference in preference, stick to price and buy from the brand that's going to be the cheapest.
I would say if you are going to buy creatine, stick with the powder form. They have it in pill form, but you have to take in so many pills to get the exact same dosage that just one little scoop is. To me, it doesn't really make sense with taking the pills.
Well, yeah, and the pills are just adding cost to it. Because
that's all it is.
Process, you have to put the tablet, put it into a tablet. So unless you just don't feel as comfortable with mixing it into a liquid and drinking it, that by taking the capsule form, you're not tasting it. But I would imagine that the capsule form is going to have a little bit of difference in terms of absorbability. Again, I haven't really researched that to give a definitive on that, but I would imagine that it's going to take a little bit longer to absorb into your system, because that capsule has to break down in your stomach before it's released out into the blood. Whereas if you consume it orally, mixed in a liquid, it may actually even begin to absorb before it even gets to the stomach itself anyhow. So again, preference, cost, those are your best recommendations.
Now, do you have a preference over unflavored versus flavored creatine?
I don't see what's the point in getting flavored if I'm going to mix it with a liquid that is flavored, and it gives me a little bit more versatility in what I mix it with. And again, adding flavor to it is going to add cost to it.
Right.
So I don't see a need to get it flavored.
Good. Me neither.
Buy the just the cheapest or most ordinary packaging, branding of the supplement, get it at the best cost, and begin to consume it regularly. Because as we've talked about, creatine is probably one of those supplements that everybody should be taking. It's not just for bodybuilders and athletes anymore. It's for anybody who wants to
age well.
Age well. Correct.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well. If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers.